It is time for our next Expo EDU session here at the Nebraska Ag Expo, and this one's going to focus on regenerative agriculture and the 5 soil principles, and we're going to talk about what they are, what does that mean for you and your farming operation. So as you are listening, please come on over to the stage. We want this to be a venue for exchanging ideas and learning and understanding and picking people's brain. We want you to ask questions, challenge our panelists here today, and really dig into some of these things. So this is a great opportunity to do that. First of all, my name is Chad Moyer. I am a farm broadcaster. I work at KTIC and the Rural Radio Network. I am based in West Point, but our company is actually a cooperative owned by 4,000 farmers and ranchers. The cooperative owns 14 radio stations and a network across the state of Nebraska. So I'm happy to be here this afternoon. I will act as your moderator here today and help try and quiz our panelists today. So we have 3 individuals who are on stage with us. First is Clint Brauer. He's with Greenfield Robotics. Also joining us is Brad Schmidt. He's with Regeneration Nation. And then on the end, Adele Durfey. She's with Clear Frontier Ag. And we're going to hear from each one of these individually, and again, how they're connected to this whole idea of regenerative agriculture. What does it mean? What is the potential and things like that? So first things first, panelists, we're just going to go right down the row, if you will, a little bit about you and your connection to this the regenerative agriculture idea and some things that you've been doing. So first, let's start with Clint Brauer, again with Greenfield Robotics. Clint, welcome.
Thank you. I'll get used to this soon. My background is I am a regenerative farmer in south central Kansas, and we also have a regenerative grain supply chain for a pet food company named Canada. And then the last thing is I have a robotics company, and I think that's why I'm sitting here today. And it's basically a robotics company that our mission is to get rid of chemicals while still maintaining regenerative principles. So that's why I'm here. That's what I do.
So we're going to get into how you've implemented and how it connects to farming, but as long as you mentioned the robotics company, like you say, that kind of brought you to the stage here. What have you done? What have you developed in the robotics space connected to agriculture?
Yeah, so the first robots we've had running on paid acres for a couple of years, and so they basically post-plant in a 30-inch row crop, soybeans, corn, milo, cotton. They run through and weed between the rows, and they're meant there to defeat pesticide resistance, right, herbicide resistance. And so they simply, right now, it's very simple what they do. They move about 3.5 miles an hour. We deploy about 10 of them. They mow within about 2 inches of the crop, about ½ inch off the ground. And we'll do that 2 or 3 times during the season to keep those pigweeds or mare's tail or whatever you're battling down. So that's what they do today.
Is that one row at a time that it accomplishes that?
Yeah, so we can do about 10 acres an hour. Mm-hmm. And they'll run, and we call it level 3 autonomy, who knows? Yeah. But there's one person at the edge of the field monitoring 10 this coming season. Yep. So
at 3.5 miles an hour, that's faster than the Oliver 66 that I learned to cultivate row crops on.
Okay. It's a lot easier than that, so.
All right, Clint, welcome. Thank you for being here. Next up, next one down is Brad Schmidt, Regeneration Nation. Brad, tell me a little bit about you and how you've got connected to this idea of regenerative agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. So my family farms in southwestern Minnesota, and we've been doing regenerative practices on our farm for about 10 years now. So in college, I worked for Dr. Dwayne Beck out of Dakota Lakes Research Farm in Pierce, South Dakota. And if anybody's familiar with Dr. Beck, he's world-renowned for no-till, and so that's kind of where I took my tutelage underneath him, and through him I got to work with people all over the U.S. and all over the world, and got to know people in all walks of life and all different types of soil types and different operations. And then I got hired on to Ducks Unlimited as their head agronomist for the U.S., and so I helped build their soil health program and worked with all sorts of different organizations, Fortune 500 companies, on helping their sustainability goals, but coming from a farmer perspective, because I still farm with my family on our operation. And then worked with them and built that into a nationally recognized program, and then started my own company, Regeneration Nation. We're a biological company focused on increasing profitability on farms. So our whole goal is to decrease as much synthetic fertilizer input as we possibly can. I know we can get to zero, but it takes time to get there. It takes a lot of work. And then, so on top of that, like I said, work with my family farm, and we do direct marketing. We direct market all of our meat products as well to consumers. So that's my background.
So tell me about this Regeneration Nation. Getting started with that company, how did you decide what to focus on? You know what I mean? Because it seems kind of broad, and okay, where do I start if I'm going to go into this world of soil health and biologics, right? How did you get started?
Well, so the biggest thing that everybody questions is how to get started down this path of regenerative agriculture. And the easiest way to get started that I thought and that I continually see is keeping it simple. And biologicals to me is very, very simple, and it's a way to get your foot in the door to get started. You know, it's something that's still an application that you're going to need to put a product type deal on, but biology's been cycling in our systems for millions and millions of years, so it's nothing new to the world, but we're understanding it more as far as on a scientific basis and on a personal basis. So that's why I wanted to get that started, and then I do the consulting stuff with that business as well, and helping guys figure out how to get started, where to get started, and what we can do to implement things on your operation. So.
Very good. Well, I'm glad that you're here, Brad. Thanks for making the trip here. Southwest Minnesota. Do we go with the Vikings and the Twins, or do we lean to St. Louis or Denver, or where do we align here?
Oh, I bleed purple. So.
Oh, poor guy. You know, I looked up to him until that. No, I'm from Minnesota originally, north of Rochester, so I beat on the Vikings at absolutely any possible time. Okay, on the end, Adele, she's with Clear Frontier Ag, Adele Durfey. Tell us a little bit about you. How are you connected to this?
Yes, absolutely. So my name is Adele Durfey, and Clear Frontier Ag is doing a lot of something similar to what Brad is actually doing himself, just as an individual farmer. So we're a land investment fund, and we focus on we're a land investment fund, I would say, at a 50,000 foot view, but we really try to differentiate ourselves from other land investment funds by taking a much broader sustainability angle and working with a lot of the growers that we're actually trying to connect with. So how this brings us here is that we understand that there's a need for change in the agricultural industry, from progression into organic or into regenerative agriculture, and we want to be the partner that can help growers actually get there. So we can give you long-term leases and we can help you on that path, kind of like holding your hand. Hey, if you want to make changes, we can actually be somebody that you can rely upon.
So how much of a demand, or how often do you get asked about soil health principles and things like that in this business of land management and helping farmers? How often does that come up? How much of a demand is there for that?
I would say actually it's increasing exponentially right now. Regenerative is a huge buzzword. Everybody is focused on soil health. So whether you're farming conventionally, you're doing regenerative, you're doing organic, whatever practice you're using, I think the whole farming industry is understanding that there's a huge benefit to soil health, and that's where a lot of the focus needs to be. So it's always a prevalent topic of conversation.
So these are our panelists. These are the brains that we're going to pick here over the next half hour or so. Again, we want this to be very interactive. If you hear something and you want to follow up, you want another question, please raise your hand. I think we're a small enough group. You can yell out, or you can say your question. I'll repeat it so everybody hears it, and then we can have a conversation here. So don't be afraid to do that. Usually on my panels, I don't have every panelist answer the same question, but to get us started, I'm going to do that. The question, first of all, is what is regenerative agriculture? As you understand it, as you've implemented it, what does that term mean? Adele, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so for me, I would say regenerative agriculture, as it seems like it's understood in the space, is anything that you're doing to your ground to improve it and to have better than it was than when you started. I kind of want to take a step back. Our company focuses a lot on organic, and I think it's now becoming understood that organic production is basically, it can be on a sliding scale. You can be doing organic very well, and you can be doing organic, on the very regenerative end of the spectrum. And then a lot of people think regenerative just is. And I think in that conversation, you can say that regenerative also is on a sliding scale, but the reality is we regenerative and organic, you really need to base it on an outcomes-based approach. So if we want to make improvements, what are we doing to the soil? And then you can call that regenerative. You know, you can say if we're trying to make an impact on X, Y, and Z, and we're executing that, you can probably classify that as regenerative. That's just my opinion.
Brad, what does that term mean to you?
So I like to look at regenerative agriculture as a systems-based approach to farming because there's a lot that goes into an operation, and it is a system that has to function as one, but there's a lot of interdependencies that work with each other that you have to kind of understand and put together. So I look at it as a system similar to like a car, and it's based off of principles. You know, and regenerative ag is similar to what Adele said. It's building off of what you're trying to expand and grow. So like sustainable was like a huge buzzword, and that's what a lot of big companies focus on, sustainability, but sustaining is staying the same. It's not growing or improving. And that's what regenerative ag is just continually growing and improving your operation to make it better for not only the next generation, but for the soil and for the overall profitability.
Clint, what about you? When you hear the term regenerative agriculture, what does that mean?
Yeah, I agree with what they said, and I'll just get real tactical and say this is what it is on my farm. So my farm, it's no-till. It's cover crops when we're not growing a cash crop. It's a 4 to 7 crop rotation, and it's grazing those cover crops, rotationally grazing those cover crops. So that's what it means on my farm at this stage of the game. So we're trying to build that soil health through doing all that.
So from here on out, the questions I'm gonna toss it out to you guys, and I hope one of you will volunteer and answer it. If not, I'm gonna pick on you. Okay? So fair warning. But I think, Adele, I think you said it before, regenerative agriculture and organic agriculture may be connected, but they're not the same, right?
Yeah, in my view, I don't think you should necessarily silo the two. I think you have a lot of growers that are practicing organic because they believe in the no chemicals, yet they want to implement no-till to the extent that they can. They want to improve the soil, they want to integrate the grazing. And so I think there's a point where you can merge the two, and that is difficult in our systems as they sit today, because in organic tillage is utilized a lot more because of the weeding. You can have regenerative systems or conventional agriculture that is classified as regenerative because the end goal is to minimize those chemical and the negative inputs, essentially. So it's kind of like pick and choose your negative inputs you're trying to decrease and your holistic approach, and if both are kind of encompassing the same, then there's some merging points. It's kind of where I see it. They shouldn't necessarily always be siloed.
Clint?
Yeah, I think I would add to that organic has a pretty well-recognized standard, and it's not changing very rapidly now. Regenerative, the standard's really still being developed. I mean, I know there are some stamps out there and stuff like that, but it's still really early. And so it's a lot more dynamic what's going on and what we learn. And I would say some of the results are not as obvious as we think either, and I'm sure we'll talk about carbon and stuff like that. So, but you have some different targets with regenerative historically.
Yeah, I just want to just recognize exactly what he's saying. In organic, you do have a USDA regulated certification and a certifying body, whereas regenerative agriculture is a little bit more kind of slippery right now. I know that there's the ROC and there's another one that's still in development. So just exactly what he said. When somebody says regenerative, you do have to ask them, what do you mean by that? Because there isn't a set standard. What it adheres to. And that's not a bad thing. I'm just saying that.
It's the fact of the matter. That's where we're at with this, right?
Yep.
So we have two farmers up here on stage. Can I ask, Brad, I'll maybe start with you. What was going on with your farm or in your farming system that you recognize? Was there a problem, or are you looking at this from a profit potential? But why did you look at regenerative ag as a system, something to implement into your system? You know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure. So we were going broke. I mean, really, that's what was happening.
To be blunt, right?
To be blunt, we were going broke. So our backs were against the wall of like, okay, well, our input costs are through the roof, and what are we going to do to mitigate that? And we had livestock in our operation, and they were in the feed yard rather than being out on the ground. And so, as many people do now, you get on the Google machine and you start looking for stuff. And this was 10 years ago, so it was just starting to hit the scene, really. And so I came across a video of Gabe Brown on YouTube and dove into it, and that's when cover crops and no-till really started to shine. And I was like, all of a sudden my eyes started to open up, because I was so entrapped in the "this is how we always did things" approach. And now my eyes were opened up, and I was like, oh, there's way more to this whole agricultural thing than what I'm seeing. And then you start seeing like erosion of soil, and you're like, oh, our ditches aren't supposed to be black in the winter. You know, that's money that we put into our inputs, and it should stay there. And so that's really, it was starting to cut costs and be more profitable, and that's why we got involved with everything in regenerative ag.
So profitability is one of the reasons. How, okay, I gotta save that question, because we need to get from the concept to how you got there. So we'll save the money question. Clint, what about you on your farm? What was happening that you had decided to take a look at this?
Yeah, I think that, I started out when I came back and started farming again, looking at organic and doing things using those methods. I never certified, but first 2 years back growing, actually I was growing a lot of vegetables at that time, and we had 2011, 2012, which were 2 ridiculous hot summers. And so water usage became a big deal to me. And so no-till being sort of one of the foundational concepts, or at least conservation tillage, I looked at that and the water savings on dry land, and it makes it, or even irrigated, frankly, that it makes, and read about the soil structure and all that kind of stuff. And so it was really, that's where I started, was the water savings. How much water can I have?
Adele, to you, what are the principles that qualify as regenerative ag? So what can producers be doing on their farms that helps with some of the things that we talked about?
So I think the farmers would probably be the better ones to speak to that topic, but I think some of the, and they can correct me, some of the major elements are keeping your soil covered, make sure there's minimal disturbance. If you do have the opportunity to integrate grazing, that's great. Utilize diverse cropping rotations if you can. I know a lot of people, it's 1, 2, 3 is max, but if you can get 4, 5, or 6, that's even better. And utilize cover cropping. So those are the major ones that I kind of resonate with, but I think there's some other practical ones that these guys are probably implementing on a daily basis. But those are some of the major concepts, I think.
Clint, what are you doing? What, in addition to maybe what she said, what have you got implemented?
Yeah, so when we're not growing a cash crop, we're growing a cover crop. And when we're growing a cover crop in the summer, we're definitely 8 to 10 species. And when we're growing the cover crop, actually one of our robotics in development moved the sheep around automatically to graze those cover crops, right? And so we're rotational grazing, and that means, in our case, the way we're doing it, they're moving multiple times every day. And so that's sort of the fundamental thing, keeping the ground covered, and that's how we're trying to build soil fertility is one of the major steps. So on the other stuff, I agree. I mean, you want to have a longer crop rotation. Sometimes that's why I built a regenerative, trending supply chain, is it allows us to grow different types of crops at a higher margin for that supply chain, right? And then the other farmers. So then you can get into longer rotations when it's not just corn, soybeans, wheat.
Brad, how about on your farm?
Yeah, so same thing. I mean, what Adele said is the overarching quote-unquote principles of regenerative ag. So that's the coolest part about it, is you can take those 5 principles and integrate them into your operation however you can make them work. And that's the best thing about it. So that's how simple it really is. It's no soil disturbance, keeping the soil covered. Soil's just like us. We wear clothes so we can stay warm, so we don't get sunburned, so we don't get hot. I mean, it's what we want to be covered. Soil is the same way. Okay, and then diversity is huge. So plant diversity, crop diversity is huge. So how we can break pest cycles, how we can break weed cycles, and then different plants exude different root exudates into the soil. So they populate a different microbiome in the soil. So now you're building your soil health through different microbiology that's living in the soil. So now the more health of the soil, the more fertility that's going to produce, and different plants will produce different types and bring different types of nutrients to the surface to be more readily available to other plants that grow next. And then the livestock implementation is
it's like the icing on the cake.
It's like the prairies used to be. Yeah, I mean, we had ruminants grazing constantly, and different cycles, and it was a rotation. They weren't in one spot all the time, so it was constant differentiation of grazing livestock. And I mean that's what we do in our operation too. It's implementing diversity and implementing the 5 soil health principles.
And I just want to add just one thing. This is all being implemented not because it just checks a box of saying, oh, this means that it's regenerative. It's all because if you get your cover cropping systems right, if you're following up with your diversified, you can be putting nutrients back into the soil. You can be building up your soil health that ultimately saves you during your catch crop production. The biodiversity keeps it, like you said, weed pressure down. That saves on any kind of insecticides, herbicides, anything like that. If you're minimizing your tillage, you're saving on gas and hours on your equipment. So it's not just because it checks a box, but it's because ultimately it's bringing you a benefit by actually bringing more life to your operation.
Clint's the
I'll add to your point on not just checking boxes. The other thing is it's more fun. Right. So typically, I mean, times it can be frustrating, but you're learning a lot. And typically, broad acre farming, you got 40, 50 cycles and you're done. Mm-hmm. Right. When you're cover cropping and all that, you're constantly growing stuff, and it's a lot more interesting to be out there and see what's going on.
Okay. Put you guys on notice. I'm going to ask one question, then I'm going to come to the crowd and take your questions here too. So think of a question, and we'll get it to the panel. So from a practical standpoint of actually implementing, going from concept or idea to actually implementing it on your farm, what were the challenges? What you have to overcome? Because it kind of sounds like you guys had somewhat of an aha moment that, hey, I need to do something. Take me from concept to actually implementing it on your acres. What was that like, Brad?
There's a lot to that. So the first thing that we did was stop tilling the soil. I mean, that was number one. One, from the cost standpoint, I mean, at the minimum, we were spending $35, $40 a year an acre just in tillage costs. So that right there, cutting that out, I mean, that's money to our bottom line at the snap of a finger instantly. Plus, we can increase our water infiltration, so now we're keeping water in the soil, we're holding it there for our plants to be able to survive through drought stress periods and all that kind of stuff. And then we started integrating cover crops and then diversifying our crop rotation. So diversity is key, right? So you don't go into Walmart and they don't sell 2 products. They don't. They have a diverse product system that they sell. And it's the same type of thing for us in the farming operation side of things. If something goes south with corn and beans, then what? Well, now you have wheat, oats, barley, alfalfa, sunflowers, flax, peas, lentils, all these different types of things that you can raise. Well, now if something goes south somewhere else, now you got more money here on the other piece, and they all complement each other. So.
Did you just compare regenerative ag to Walmart? Did I get that right?
That might cost you some money, or you might get some money. I'm not sure how that's going to play out. How about you?
Look, I think that the way I looked at it was research, and actually I was developing something I was living sort of in a silo, and I was calling it integrated farming. I was kind of developing this on my own, and then someone's like, hey, it's called regenerative ag, and someone else is kind of doing it.
There's an app for that already, man. I can tell you.
Okay, I need to get out more. But anyways, that was a while back.
He is from Kansas.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
sorry.
That's the way it goes there. Look, the thing is you research and then you commit, and you have to know you're going to have a bunch of failures because you're doing something new. And so there's a lot of support out there now. Right? And so you can learn from other folks' failures, but you're always pushing it a bit if you're doing it right. And the cover cropping really is the fundamental shift today. No-till on that. Yes, there's some changes, different equipment. Get rid of most of your tillage equipment. But it's really about the way you're doing with the cover crops and your crop rotation.
And it's probably the easiest step too to integrate. Just throwing it on before or after. It's probably the first easiest step that someone can take in that direction.
Yeah, you will. Go ahead. You will hit some risk if you're in a semi-arid place. I dropped $35-$40 an acre on cover crop seed this summer, and a lot of it I've never seen. I'm worried when it's going to show up.
You might surprise you. You never know how long that holds out, right?
Exactly.
Adele, are you hearing some of these same things too in the farmers that you work with, some of the paths to get some of these things done? Similar?
Yep, absolutely. I've spoken to several people with same stories. You know, hey, we're losing money. This is something is not operating right. Can we take a step back? Can we reassess what we're doing and implement something different? And the results have been much more positive. So.
All right. Are there questions from the crowd? Hands in the air is something that you've thought of that you think is a burning question for these guys and would like to pick their brains about something that you've heard so far? Sir. Here's the mic.
Oh boy. I'll try not to talk to the entire room. I hear you guys talking about a space that is more niche almost than what most of us out here and those people out there are dealing with. 1982, I was working for Elanco and doing research. And during that research, I discovered that we were way over applying herbicides, that we didn't need to apply that much herbicide to get control. Came home to the farm and started looking at things outside the box and was probably early on doing no-till and discovered through lots of mistakes, lots of errors and everything that it was slowly improving my soil. I had no idea why, except I loved the fact that I didn't have to fuel the tractor up near as much. And all of those things that you guys talked about. However, we've got a million acres out there that's being done just the same way it's always been done, with some no-till happening, strip-till happening and all that. How do we get from this point with those farmers with a mass amount of agriculture to understand what the improvements are to the soil, what's going on underneath, outside of organic, outside of, the organic thing is a great deal. I'm not dissing it whatsoever, but the whole country is not going to be organic. So you guys have been working around this for a while. You probably have some ideas on how we push out the education or we push out the incentives to the 5,000 acre farmers, so that they understand what the benefits are for them to take that next step. Always run cows also. Always ran cows on all of my soil, and I think that's probably been a great benefit.
So I think the question is, where do we take it from a niche, break it out of a niche, make it more widely utilized? Maybe would be a good way of, how do we go from here?
Okay, so my general feeling is that if somebody is doing something and they have been doing it already for 15, 20, 30 years, it's going to be pretty hard to get to them to change unless there is something that is pushing them in that direction. Either it's a personal issue, people that have had cancer want to switch to organic food production. It's a financial pinch, they're looking to save money on the ground, or there are external incentives, whether that's coming from carbon credits or it's coming from USDA programs or what's going on in the U.S. today. So I think it's kind of sad, but I don't think that individuals such as ourselves are really going to, change 50% of the population. But what I do see coming down is that people are understanding now more prevalently in the ag space, it seems like, that soil health is key, for one, along with a lot of the other integrated principles in terms of managing your finances, in terms of capturing some of those external financial benefits, and potentially it's better for your health. So I think that's where it's really going, the space in general. If you can kind of pair all of these things, that's where it's going to start making the shift. And I think that we're beginning to see that with the amount of information, the amount of biologicals you're seeing going on, the amount of companies that are focused on carbon credits, incentives for cover cropping, etc. So it's going to be slow. It's a very large moving body, but I think it would get there eventually, and that's just kind of my take on it.
So the two farmers that are in the room here, what are the conversations like with your fellow farmers? You know, and it kind of goes to what he was saying. How do you, because I think you win some of these things person by person, right? Meeting by meeting, table by table. What's it like when you visit with your other farmers, your fellow farmers?
Well, the first thing you do is you tell them they're doing it all wrong.
Oh yeah, that lights them right up, right?
Look, I'm going to make probably a different point here. Brad talked about that. There's one thing. I grew up in Kansas, farming both sides of my family, 13 years in the tech industry. I got in the internet in 1997. No one in Kansas knew what it was, right? 2 years later, everyone wanted stock tips, right? Got into cell phone stuff, technology, right? How many people have a flip phone in here? Almost no one, right? And so what did Apple have to do to get you to adopt that? Not a lot. Right? Some of it's just inertia, time, farmers seeing what other farmers are doing. It's a technological adoption curve. Everything follows a very similar curve. So eventually they'll see, hey, this guy is doing something interesting. I see the benefit of it. And the more of us there are, the more people are going to come on board. So, the early adopters are going to be early adopters, late adopters are going to be late adopters. There's not a whole lot you can do aside from maybe government programs, and I'm sure Brad will have a bunch of those. So that's my view.
Brad, go ahead.
No, you're like 100% right. Like 10 years ago when we were first getting into this, I couldn't find anything anywhere on anything. And now you can't pick up a magazine or anything without having a mention of cover crops, no-till, soil health, something like that. So he's 100% right. It's just that it's going like this right now. And eventually everybody's going to hear about it, everybody's going to know about it. The other thing that we have to also respect and understand is that some people just aren't going to change. It's like politics. Some people are on either side of the aisle and they're just not going to change, and that's just the way it is. And it's going to continue to grow and progress. But yeah, you're right.
Okay, question from the audience. Who's got another question? Sir, bring the mic back here.
Kind of a general question. Approaching soil testing, big area out there. Is the sky's the limit, but just maybe narrow it a little down to what you'd like to focus on?
When you have a soil test, what are you looking at, or what should you look at?
So there's a lot of different soil tests out there. My favorite, I guess, coming from the regenerative ag field, is the Haney soil test. That's what I like the most. You're going to hear a lot of flack and a lot of pushback from people on that test because it's not university quote-unquote approved. But Dr. Rick Haney is a farmer, and he did the research and does the test to work with farms and how plants actually function and how they take in nutrients. So that's how his test is based. It's not chemical, it's biological. And a lot of our big agricultural companies are based around chemicals, and it's big, big, big money. Trillions and trillions of dollars. When you start messing with that, they're going to refute it. But to me, it's farmer-based, and I like that test because it shows organic, inorganic nutrients, what's available, what's going to become available in the plant in the growing season. So that really shows what you can start to cut back on as far as synthetic fertilizer inputs and all that stuff. That's PLFA testing biologicals. There's a lot of testing.
Okay, before you answer, I just want to follow up. So the difference is, than the conventional soil test, the difference is what? It shows some longer term, what nutrients might become available over time? Is that the difference?
Yes, yeah, because our generic soil testing that's done now is just showing, what's available currently or what's there at that moment in time. Well, soil functions change, our seasons change, rain can dictate what's going to become available and all that kind of stuff. Biological activity dictates what's going to become available. So all of it changes. So you could test every single week throughout the entire growing season, and it'll be different every single week for what's there. So,
what are your thoughts on soil tests? Do you have any?
Well, I think, more would be better, and I'm going to talk my book for a second, but we're getting ready to put soil probes on the front of our robots where you could just drop it off at the edge of the field and go around and probe and take more tests more often so you could grid sample more often. The other thing, I think, one key thing you're looking at to add to that is you're looking at soil organic matter. Again, that can wildly vary over time, but that's a key metric. You know, what's happening to my SOM levels. You know, it should be going up.
Thank you for that question. I appreciate it very much. To come back to your business on the robotics side, is that a big jump from regenerative agriculture to the use of robots or autonomous equipment in these systems?
Yeah, the reason I started Greenfield was to get the chemicals out and allow regenerative to scale without those chemicals. And so we're focused on herbicides first. And so, but now that we feel like we have some of those things developed and they're well on their way, we're working on how do we allow regenerative, some of those other things. How do you plant your cover crop while your cash crop's finishing, right? And get good soil to seed contact. How do you know, test more often, right? So you're trying to transition from synthetics more and more to microbial, natural activity or other things you add. Well, the more you can test, the better off you are, but those tests are expensive. So that's the next thing is how do you test more often and drive those costs down. So it really is a way to make it scale.
I have a final question that I'm going to have each one of them answer to kind of round us out here, but are there questions from the crowd that we haven't covered yet? Something that you a burning idea, something that you want these guys to respond to? Thank you for the questions from the crowd before too. So I think we're getting close enough to the end. I think this will take us through to the end of our time here, unfortunately, because this is just getting going. we could do this a couple of hours, I think. But this is the question that I saved from before. Remember, I said we got to have a path in this conversation. So the question I have for you is, how does the work in regenerative ag that you've done, how has that affected your bottom line? And it's not all about money, but money has to be a part of it. Profitability has to be a part of your operation, because that's one of my definitions of sustainability is you get to do this next year, right? And you need to make money. You have to have profitability to do that. So regenerative ag, how has that literally affected your bottom line?
Yeah, so one, it's definitely driven down fertilizer expense. You know, I can tell just based on other conversations with other farmers, hey, I'm spending this much to put a crop out, and my numbers are definitely declining. I'm not the best person to ask for that, though, and I'll tell you why. Is my entire farm is one big R&D farm. And so, and we have robots running out there doing crazy stuff. And so I never, you know, we're doing a pretty poor job of measuring the results of the soil over time, and because we might have a robot go crazy and knock out 10 rows, right? And so, so that's, you know, but I definitely can see our soil improving. And I think the one thing not to gloss over is adding grazing ruminants. That's a consistent revenue flow. If you can figure out how to have water there and grazing, then you're basically, like I like to say is, I don't know where you want to put the cost of the revenue, but you're planting a cover crop, which builds the soil, and you're growing an animal on that. And you can sell that animal, and your cost is what, right? And so,
But it may not even be owning the livestock, because there's plenty of livestock in this part of the world. Make an agreement with your neighbor or something like that, right?
Exactly. So I think that's early, but you know, we run sheep, and you know, again, we're doing robotic stuff, so it's been a challenge at times developing that. But man, I'll tell you, to me, you know, I'm building that flock. We'll put beef on there. We may even put cooney pigs at some point. And I think that I look at that as just this income coming in, and as long as you can keep the animals alive. And by the way, sorry not to get too far into this, but when you graze rotationally, you don't have to give a whole lot of stuff to those animals, right? So in the case of sheep, we basically give them sea kelp, a touch of copper to keep the parasites at bay. We move them super often so they don't get a huge parasite load going on, and then we give them a mineral. But other than that, they're just grazing cover crops or heck, sometimes weeds. So
there you go. By the way, before, when you were talking about the sheep and the robots together, my cartoon bubble just absolutely exploded. I think that would be hilarious to watch. Brad, again, a bottom line. I mean, this profitability. How has this regenerative ag affected you?
immensely.
Yeah.
I mean,
How?
huge.
By what part of it?
Yeah. So, for like I mentioned before, tillage, we were at the minimum spending $35, $40 an acre on tillage, and we don't do that anymore. We have a lot of rocks, so we had to pick rock when we do tillage. Well, now you're hiring a rock picking crew to come out and pick rocks. That doesn't happen anymore. Herbicides, we're down to maybe one pass a year now because we have our soil covered. We don't do the tillage, we don't increase the weed populations, and we do cover crops and we do grazing. So our herbicide passes are down from 3 or 4 to 1. Seed cost, another big one. We don't plant the latest and greatest hybrids. So $400 and some an acre seed cost down to $100 and some an acre seed cost is huge, right there. Fertilizer, we when we put on fertilizer for our corn, we maybe put on 80 pounds of nitrogen an acre. We don't put on any phosphorus, no potassium, and we've been experimenting with doing absolutely zero fertilizer at all. And that's where the biologicals have really played a big part in that, and the manure. And again, livestock, when they're on the ground, we're not having more pieces of equipment taking feed out of the field, bringing it to the feedlot. They have 4 legs. They can walk around and they can do all that work for us that we don't have to do. And the technology now that's out there with, robotics and virtual fence systems and polywire and being able to drop gates when you're not there, and cattle and sheep can move themselves. The technology that we have now is crazy. So I mean, at the minimum, we're $400 or $500 an acre less of input costs that we had, which is huge.
Adele, you have any thoughts on profitability?
I think that these guys have covered it pretty thoroughly. I mean, the reduction of inputs, boosting your yields, equipment being minimized usage on the field, it's labor, everything. So I think they've got it pretty good.
Very good. Okay, unfortunately we've come to the end of our program. I'm going to ask, since I went this way on the introduction, I'm going to come back on one last point. What do you want to make sure these people leave here today with when it comes to regenerative agriculture, the concept, the implementation, seeing it all the way through, and you can't duplicate answers, okay? Ladies first, Adele goes start. What do you want to make sure these guys remember?
I would say if you're here and you're wanting to know about regenerative ag, likely the takeaway is there's a lot of information out there, it can be done, and likely somebody has already made that mistake. Because of the internet, you can probably find that. This is an increasing topic, so if you're interested in it, just search it up. You can learn about it. Talk to some of these guys.
Brad, what do you think?
Ask lots of questions and never be afraid to fail. I mean, failure stands for first attempt in learning, so just keep trying until you get it right.
I got to write that out. I'm from Minnesota. What do you think?
I think if you haven't gotten into this, definitely get into it, and also take the time, read up on what everyone else has done, but you also have clear eyes. So I had a conversation last night with someone who was one of the people who really brought the organic standard into being for 4 hours. And I'm listening to something he said to me, right, last night, and I've been thinking about it ever since, and I'm thinking about making a change on how I'm practicing this, right? He's not necessarily a no-tiller, right? So this is really early, what we're doing, and there are things we know that work, but we're all probably making a lot of mistakes too, and we don't even know it, but it's still working. And so you have an opportunity to innovate too, even if you're just now getting into it, because we're just getting started on this, right? And we really don't understand this one.
Yeah, and there's no exact prescription that will work for everybody. So.
But the cool thing is we can learn together as farmers and agriculturalists.
Right.
We're gonna take this and we're gonna work it, right?
Yeah. Rising tides lift all boats.
There you go.
So.
Very well said. Hey, I think that's a good point to leave on here. Thank you, panelists. If you would put your hands together for me, would you? Adele Durfey with Clear Frontier Ag, and then Brad Schmidt, Regeneration Nation, and of course Clint Brauer from Greenfield Robotics. Thank you for being on our panel. These guys are going to float around here for a little while. We are going to have to take them off stage though, because in about 10 minutes we have another program coming up. Precision Ranching is here. We're going to get to that program here in about 10 minutes, so stick around for that. Again, thank you panelists, and thank you guys for being here as well.